About 2 weeks ago now, I was blessed with the opportunity to attend a conference for Presbyterian pastors called Credo. 28 of us, all early in our ministries, gathered in Richmond, Virginia, in order to take a hard look at our lives, our ministries, and ourselves. Some of us arrived gung-ho, some of us arrived skeptical, some of us arrived already on the edge of burnout, and some of us arrived comfortable but eager for renewal. We ran the gamut. But the conference required each of us to be all in. We ate together, we worshiped together, we worked together, we played together. We talked to leadership, discipline, money, vulnerability, inanity, you name it, we went there. On the last day, as is sometimes the tradition in a conference like this, we sat in the chapel in a circle and shared a bit, and shared not only what our experience of Credo had been, but also what it meant for how we would go home. And toward the end of the conversation, one of my colleagues said something that hit home. Sometimes he shared, "You can't help wondering if all of this is make-believe. The church, the show, what we do with our lives. Are we playing dress up?" We all listened to him, and you could tell in the room that he hit on something we all struggled with, but he went on. But this week has been real. We, sisters and brothers, have lived something together true. This has felt to me like the kingdom. And if this is what it looks like for Christians to gather together, if maybe this is church, then maybe we really can glimpse the kingdom here and now on earth. And maybe that really is something worth going home and continuing to work with and for. Our brother's words struck a chord because we all knew what he meant, and I imagine you do too. There are those times when we have to wonder about the robes, the processions, the choreography, the show of church. Chris and I and the staff and your worship committee and many of you could articulate our reasoning behind each decision you see enacted on a Sunday morning. Don't get me wrong, but we know the risks are true. Not even just the risk that it becomes just going through the motions, but the great risk that it is all truly sound and fury or pomp and circumstance signifying nothing. I have to wonder if the scribes in today's gospel passage deep down ever had that same fear. I wonder if they wanted somewhere to be good and true, worthy religious leaders, but slowly let the bad habits of greed and routine take over their lives. Or if maybe they knew full well their own falsehood and hypocrisy. Either way, Jesus is unafraid to name the truth in that temple. He warns his listeners, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. When it comes to playing make-believe, Jesus will have none of it. The scribes wear long robes and say long prayers, and behind the scenes, there's a different story. The role of the temple was to care for the least. The orphan and the widow symbolize this true purpose for the scribes. And Jesus is clear. They devour widows' houses. Justice is not served. Mercy is not shown. Priorities are out of whack. Jesus does not love the way the temple is being run. It is corrupt and mismanaged. It is, in fact, condemned. And it is in this context that we hear Jesus' next words, this next story in our gospel passage. Listen again. Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. A poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." You may be familiar with this story already. The widow's mite is a well-loved tale. Jesus watches wealthy givers come into the temple and approach the treasury. They put in significant sums. Meanwhile, a poor widow, the least of these in Jesus' culture, gives a mere penny. Yet Jesus tells us her gift is worth the most. It was all that she had. In the context of the corruption of the scribes, this story should sting. After all, Jesus has just reminded us that the scribes, those who are collecting the money, are devouring widows' houses. Scholar Robert Bryant points out how they devoured widows' houses is not entirely clear. But scribes may have been exploiting widows through transactions involving their houses, personal property, and land. And here we have one of those same widows giving all that she has to them. So now we have a challenge, because you see, Jesus' condemnation of the temple is not the only context in which we read this widow's mite story. We are also in the context of stewardship season. Next week will be Dedication Sunday, and these past 3 weeks, we've heard stories of worshiping, learning, and serving, like you just heard from Chris. Now is the season where we ask you not only to give, but also to help us plan for our 2016 budget by making an honest estimate of how much you think you will be able to give through this next year, so you can understand a preacher's dilemma. On the one hand, we have an exemplary woman, one who trusts God with all that she has, a great example of stewardship. But on the other hand, we have a corrupt temple, unworthy recipients of her sacrifice, robe-wearing symbolism devoid of substance. While at first blush, this story isn't doing the church any favors. At a deeper level, I am so grateful for this illustration, because it brings to the fore what I believe is the greatest challenge to church giving. And it's not the lack of generosity. It's not a misunderstanding about how our faith grows through giving. Certainly, we need to be reminded of that, to strengthen and to challenge ourselves and each other when it comes to how we spend our money. Don't get me wrong. I know I need to hear and be reminded that where my treasure is, there will my heart be also. And when it comes to clarifying what our values are and where our values are, tracking our spending may be where the rubber hits the road. But the idea that giving to God is both a clear call and a way to grow in our faith seems fairly straightforward and seems fairly broadly understood, especially for those sitting in a church pew. What is not clear is that giving to a church is the same as giving to God. As someone who frequently calls for the offering, I am acutely aware of this tension, and I doubt that I am alone. When we hear those words, "Let us give back to God what is God's," maybe occasionally we think, sure, I'll do that by giving to disaster relief and to the poor, to the widows and the orphans, but not to the church. And here we have Jesus calling out just this issue. Clearly in the gospel passage, giving to the temple is not the same as giving to God. And this is also why I was so grateful for those words at Credo 2 weeks ago. Because while I know that I need to be reminded that religious leadership and religious institutions are particularly susceptible to corruption and skewed values, I also needed to be reminded of those times when we are not the scribes. Those times when we really are not playing dress up, but attempting to live fully into our call as followers of Jesus. I imagine you believe in that difference too. That difference between what Jesus was railing against and what we do here at Lakeside. The ways, despite our very real flaws and foibles, we do occasionally glimpse the kingdom of God here and now because of being church together, here in this place with these people. For one, let me go ahead and point out a couple of very face value differences between us and the temple of Jesus' time. First, unlike the money of the temple, our money here at Lakeside involves full transparency. That widow would not have known where her 2 cents would go, but we do. You see a budget each year. Our amazing treasurer, Bob Lee, points out where we've been spending and keeps us up to speed on that. Budgets are published for session on a monthly basis, and you're welcome to view them any other time. If you want more detail, ask. Ask your finance committee, ask your staff, ask session members, or if you're really into it, join the finance committee. They would love to have you. Second, unlike the widow, who would have had no decision-making power, we believe in a system of governance that listens to all of our membership. Our budget is managed by a session of elected church members, men and women, old and young. Don't get me wrong, it still takes significant trust. When we give to a general budget, we don't choose exactly where our particular mite is spent. We choose to trust those we have elected. These differences matter. But beyond clarifying who we are not, discerning if and how our giving to Lakeside might truly mean giving to God means clarifying who we are. And that question gets to the crux of why that statement of credo mattered to me. Because church is about more than helping out the widow and the orphan. It is about more than charity. It is about more than studying our Bibles. It is about more than the programs and the projects. It is about glimpsing the kingdom. And if it is about glimpsing the kingdom, then it has to be about community. It has to be about doing all the service and the programs and the projects, yes, but doing them better, doing them together. And it has to do with doing them with worship at the heart of who we are and what we do. Let's put that another way. Let's talk about money. At Lakeside, we do great mission work. Chris just told us a lot about it. In 2015, in just our operating budget, we spent $30,000 on mission. We serve. You've heard that. That's important. But why not just give your money directly to those organizations we partner with? Why not just write a check for Open Door or CLASP? Or why not just give a check to make sure the building itself stays open for all the groups that come here? Why not just do that? When it comes to glimpsing the kingdom here at Lakeside, there is no doubt I have glimpsed God at work through our service and mission. But what makes that really come alive, really become holy and meaningful, is the way it has brought people together and ignited something in all involved. It is the way it has been a part of a larger relationship with God and with each other. Simply showing up to serve or sending our money that way would not create that kingdom glimpse. The service is just a piece of the whole, and the whole is so much greater than the sum of its parts. After all, what makes the gift of the poor widow valuable is neither the amount nor the recipient. Her gift's value rests in its completeness. Theologian Emil Towns puts it this way: the coins represent faith-filled offering found in presenting all of who we are and all we hope to become to God for service to the world. Indeed, offerings in this sense is something other than prayer, tithes, Eucharist, or communion. It is not so much the act of giving or receiving as it is the act of being. I hope and believe that church in general, and Lakeside in particular, can be worthy of the sacrificial gift of a widow. But the catch-22 of it is this: if we want to be in a church worthy of our investments, we have to invest in it. Not just money or time or talent, but as Towns put it, in the act of being. We too are more than a sum of our parts. We are more than givers or statistics or schedules or committee members. For these kingdom glimpses to happen, we have to bring our very selves to the table. That's what it took for those 28 of us for that 1 week in Richmond. And that's what it takes here. Our whole selves, our honest and skeptical and enthusiastic and burnt out and flawed, and our money-making and our money-scrimping selves. Ultimately, of course, Mark's story of the widow giving the whole of her life to the temple pivots the gospel into Jesus' next steps in ministry. This is Jesus' last public discourse in Mark. Henceforward, Jesus is making his steady path to the cross. Pete Peary says, this widow offers a glimpse into what Jesus is about. He is on the way to giving the whole of his life. And like the widow, Jesus' gift is not to be received by the perfect or the worthy, but is for something that is corrupt and condemned, as Peary puts it, all of humanity, the whole world. Because of that gift, we, unworthy as we are called together as church, are called to seek kingdom glimpses. And because of that gift, we are called to bring our whole unworthy selves to God and to one another. Let's continue to make Lakeside a part of that. Amen.